This is episode 55 of our talk, and today I have Nicolas Ferguson as my guest. Nicolas and I met at the other art fair, and I was highly interested in how he uses his intuition to paint, and especially portraits surrounded with the insights he receives. He paints with a lot of colors, writes poetry, and has a surrealistic view, which also interests me. And he likes to provoke the viewer as well as himself. Welcome, Nicolas. I'm really happy to have you here with me.
Thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to catch up again. So you write that you are mostly self-taught, except for the classes in secondary school. You became a marketing person in the beauty industry. How much advantage do you have from that in your art business? Is marketing something you still apply to your own art business?
It's a good question. So, I mean, I studied, as you say, I studied art at secondary school, and I knew it was my calling. I didn't know quite how, I suppose at that age, I didn't know quite how to stand up for myself because I had a lot of noise in the background of how are you going to make a career out of this? So I thought, okay, fine. Well, in that case, let's do what I'm told and, and do something else. And when I came out of a course, which was a hospitality degree, I love people. So hospitality was quite well suited in that context. I thought, well, how the hell am I going to apply this to making money? And I thought, well, the opportunity that I see in business is marketing because it's creative. And what I quickly understood was marketing is essentially, of course, we're creating a market for our products, our services, our goods, whatever they may be. But what I also realized very quickly is that marketing is about storytelling, and I am a natural storyteller. And effectively, it's about creating a community, first a connection that then creates community. And stories are a means of creating connection. And so when you ask how I use my marketing in the context of my art, what I'm figuring out very quickly is it's all about creating connection and serving people's needs. And you may say, well, how is creating a painting a need? And in many respects, I think it's about validation. It's about making the person feel valued, making them feel heard. And the other thing which I recognize is I'm a lateral thinker. We were talking briefly before we jumped on the recording about intuition. And for me, I'm often told that I'm very good at connecting dots. And what does that mean? Creating connections where connections haven't existed before. And so I recognize that that's what I put into my art, and that's how I use marketing and branding to this day in what I do.
Marvelous. I love that, what you say, the storyteller. Yeah, the same for me. It was in music as well as in the portraits I paint. And it's so interesting because I have to admit that at the beginning I had like marketing, but it is kind of interesting when you make it a creative endeavor in itself, isn't it? And it is all about storytelling. We are stories. The whole world is connected through stories. I think that if you create a map or a painting with all the dots that entail stories, and I paint the portraits with it, we get a very interesting work. Large, but because I think we all are that. Would you agree?
100%. And I think it's about communication, and there are so many different ways of communicating. There's visual communication, oral communication, energetic communication.
So. Energetic, absolutely. And I think that's even more apparent with someone intuitive like yourself, which I can relate to. You energetically feel attracted or repelled.
Completely.
Yeah. So your work, you say, is dreamlike, and I looked at it, and it is dreamlike. And I had to come to terms with it itself. It's intuitive and provocative, surely. Can you tell me the story behind your work? So, like, why do you create the work you do? And not
sure.
did, but what you do, because I know you have done something to prove yourself to the art world, like, okay, but I can do that too. But now, what you create now,
Mm.
can you tell me why you do that? The
Yeah,
story
100%.
behind that.
So I think you know, to your point, like before I used to paint aesthetics, things that I found beautiful or ugly, actually, just things I found interesting, curious. And now I really bring in this element of curiosity and storytelling. So I'll often get an idea, and the idea may seem very abstract. I'll give you an example. It was a piece that I created in 2021, but it kind of tunnels in or kind of adds color to what I'm doing at the moment. And it was called Frühstück, which means breakfast in German.
Mm.
And what I recognize with breakfast is it's something that we all do. We all break the fast at some point in time, whether it's when you would traditionally have breakfast or not. And we do it in very different ways. And, or more to the point, we consume different foods. So, you know, you may have an Indian person eating curry, or you may have a Japanese person eating raw fish, or you may have a British person having bacon and eggs, or a Danish person having cheese and ham, or an Italian smoking a cigarette and a coffee. But we all have to do it, and we will often be repelled, to your point, by, as in disgusted by what other people do,
Mm.
and attracted by what people who are similar to us do. So I might find I'm quite open-minded when it comes to food, but I might still find it disgusting for some people to eat certain things at a certain time of day. And so for me, that's just it's a way of showing humanity, and it's a way of showing who we are and our idiosyncrasies. So then if I take a step beyond that, like the collection of pieces I created last summer were all about a theme of home and what home means. Because home, while it might be the four walls and a roof that we live under, it means so much more. It can mean our body, it can mean our mind, it can mean a feeling, a sense. And then in the autumn, I came up with another theme, which was the theme of perspective. And perspective is the theme that I created a collection for most recently, as I say, in the autumn. And it's this idea that there are so many, each of us has a perspective. And it's simply that, it's a view, and we're all entitled to have an opinion. And it's interesting, I went to a talk once, and the author who was doing the talk, he said, you know, in any situation you'll have only, and I don't know how much I agree with this, but it's an interesting context. And he said, in any situation, you'll have three angles. You'll have, let's say, a conversation with two people. You'll have what one person saw, what the other person saw, and then you'll have what happened.
Mm.
And so, you know, we're always filtering information, and these pieces on perspective also speak about reality, and they question what is reality. What and to your point about the dreams, how I believe that we imagine first, and then we live what we've imagined. So everything that I live is a consequence of something I imagined either last night or earlier in my life. And so these pieces they are quite provocative, and they all question this concept of reality.
That is so amazing. I love that. I really love that, because this goes further than just intuition. This is even spiritual, and we call this spiritual. And I think, just like many words in the world are worn out,
Mm.
but for all the books I read about spirituality, and I just read Eckhart Tolle,
Mm.
Presence in the Now, everything we see is an illusion. It's an illusion. It was something in someone's mind at one point, and it became and made it a reality. And it says that you question that, but we can also make it in a reality for ourselves.
100%. And I think, just going back to what, I'll touch on that again in a second, but I think just going back on your earlier question about, you know, what is my art all about? It really feeds off my personality, and my personality is playful, it's cheeky, and it's provocative. You know, I have nicknames for all of my friends, And I've got friends from all over the world, and I tease them a lot, and they'll often say, only Nick can get away with that. And it's because I like to point, I like to point out, and it's about myself as well. Some people say I'm the worst person for being teased, but it's just about pointing out our idiosyncrasies, and we've all got them.
Yeah.
And
It's really important, because when you look at how many cultures do we have, but we're one race, you know, we're just human animals. That's it. But we have so many different perspectives, different backgrounds, different cultures. And it's interesting what you say, that we talk, and within our talk, something happens. So in this case, I listen and I reflect, and I listen actively, which is different than keeping something in my mind because I want to say it. But we create a story here, isn't it?
100%. And just touching on what you said about reality, I believe that what we imagine creates our reality, which then reinforces it's our focus that creates our reality, and then our reality reinforces our belief system. So we're constantly creating.
Yeah.
And it means
absolutely.
we can prove it because we see it.
Yeah.
But only I can see the exact version of what I see. You might be able to see parts of it, but you won't be able to see all of it. And I'll be able to prove what I see because it's my illusion.
Exactly, as I have my illusion. But you seem to me also a very light-hearted person, with your teasing and your smile and the way you talk. Am I right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Life is
exactly.
fun.
So that brings you, going back to the spirituality, in a high vibration also. It's your energy feels light automatically, and I already had that in on the other art fair when we talked. And from what you say, you lean into the surrealistic masters, and that's also what you said on your website. Is this a more philosophical approach for you, or, coming back to our conversation, do you see the world we live in as a world that is an illusion to start with? Or is what you create pure anti-establishment, what the original surrealistic masters entailed with their work?
I mean, there certainly is an element of questioning reality, which could be seen as anti-establishment. I wouldn't call it, it's not, I think it's provocative. It's asking the audience to question their lives, and to your point earlier, recognizing how we're all so connected, you know, and so there are, you know, people have compared some of my pieces to to surrealism as a movement, and it's interesting. I was studying up on surrealism a little bit more last year than I ever had before, so I got a stronger flavor of what the surrealist masters were really looking to achieve in terms of, you know, overthrowing certain establishments, as you say. I think for me, yes, there certainly is that element of I see there's so much suffering in the world, you know?
Yeah.
And for me, it's about recognizing that life isn't, I mean, there's no shoulds, but life isn't necessarily to be suffered. Life is to be enjoyed.
Yeah.
And as we said earlier, everything is imagined. So, you know, imagination is our way out. And that is, for me, is, and don't get me wrong, I have bad days. I have, you know, I mean, as they say, as the alchemists say, you know, life is a pendulum, and you're constantly swinging from side to side, and there's no way out of the pendulum aside from non-identification, which again goes back to, or non-attachment, which goes back to spirituality again.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think, you know, particularly for that piece about perspectives, you know, there's the piece which is called Immersibilis, which questions whether such a thing as progress actually exists. You know, there's a rubber duck aiming for a Himalayan salt iceberg. It's a Himalayan salt berg, and the occupants of the duck, a little bit like Titanic, are arguing about which way to go, in, out, left, right, and it speaks to where we are in the world at this point in time. You know, there are certain things that are occurring, and yet at the same time we're arguing about some of the smallest details, which actually have very little impact.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's also a bit part of the internet that throws everything and the whole world open. That you see something happening in a part of the world that you don't even know exists, and it doesn't relate to you unless it comes closer. And I think so at one point it makes us more able to connect, like how we connect, and also take distance and worry more about those very small parts that probably don't have anything to say in the bigger part of life. But it means something to people or to us or to them specifically. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's comfort in you know, I think there's comfort in labels and attachment. And I think that's what we find ourselves in now, is a situation, a fragmented world, a more connected world in many respects in terms of technology.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a more fragmented world because we're creating so many labels, which, while they provide an element of comfort because it provides identity, at the same time, I would actually say that it actually creates more separation.
It does. I agree completely with you. And I saw that with the duck, and I had and also with the chicken, and this is also humor. It puts us really in our naked situation, and tells us about how we all, something new comes when we flock towards it, and everything is about that. And then a few months later, it's something else. It's like you have a shot, and the whole herd goes that side, and that is you all energy is shattered. That's what I strongly feel myself. All energy is shattered, and people are kind of lost. And in that sense, when I look at your art and I see that one where you have all the bubbles, you see all the people in bubbles. It's seemingly one, but we're still in our small bubble. And you kind of point, for my feeling, I find when I look at it, you say like, listen, don't think that you're really connected, because you make your own bubble smaller and smaller and smaller.
100%. I think Bubbles is actually the poem that I will read shortly, back of your invitation. But Bubbles, absolutely, it speaks to the fact that, you know, in Bubbles there are Western heroes and Western villains. Yep. And, you know, the Western heroes are as varied or diverse as Toilet Duck, the character that features on the domestic home care product that you put down your toilet, and imagining yourself being the toilet duck, like it's not it's not necessarily the most pleasant experience as a bubble. Or then Hitler, you know, who Hitler is a Western villain, and Hitler's belief was he was doing humanity a favor by ridding it of the people he felt were impure in his context, right? And we know that that's not valid. It's not a moral or any other argument. Yet to him, his reality, he was doing what he felt was right. And then you've got other people like Mandela, who had his own reality of what he felt was right, you know. And in modern day South Africa, where I lived for 6 months, you've got a lot of complexities. And, you know, Mandela felt that, you know, in the 90s, that he needed to unite South Africa among all of the people who inhabited that country. And now there are parties who disagree with him. So again, he had his reality and he argued for it and he believed in it. And that's what Bubbles is all about. It's like we all have our bubbles. And I think, again, going back to suffering, I think, the key to not suffering is to actually exit your bubble.
Yeah. And Eckhart Tolle would say surrender.
And surrender, 100%.
Surrender. Because, but that's what we do. The bubble is, I see the bubble as our mind, and our mind creates, because you feel something, and then your mind starts to make a nice pattern around it. It builds this whole bubble around you, and you stay in that bubble, and you rehash it all the time and all the time and all the time. And when you surrender, it's a poof, and you see a whole different world and get new perspectives.
100%.
Yeah. And you represent that as a person. That's my strong feeling. I had that with you immediately when we met at the other art fair. So your poetry. So you accompany your work with poetry. And yes, I invited you to read one for us. Can you read us Bubbles?
Absolutely, I'd love to.
Thank you.
So Bubbles, ha-has abound. Invisible boundaries, so real to me. Each of us living our own reality. Beelzebub to you, Gabriel to me. Like dodgems drawn to one another by metaphysical forces, to collide, divide, or provide, until the game is up and we rejoin the soup of consciousness. Or have we missed the exit?
Beautiful. Just let this sink in. I'm not going to say anything. I will put a link to it because people need to read this. You need to embody this one. So you are philosophical and spiritual. Yeah. And with that, when we met, you told me also that you paint portraits intuitively and you surround them with messages that you receive or channel. That's what I would say. I channel that. I've seen those things on Instagram. So like apply and I will paint or draw your soulmate. Is that specifically what you learned?
So the portraits that I do, I call them self-reflective portraits. So the way it started actually was last year. I decided I wanted to do a portrait of myself, but I didn't want to do a standard portrait. And in the end, I got this intuition, I guess you'd call it, to paint myself in a cartoon-like manner and naked. All around it, I included things I like and dislike about myself, mainly physical attributes, recognizing that my reality is my reality and it's not reality is the tagline I have at the bottom of that image, which forms part of the home collection. And from there, I've been learning a technique to read other people's, well, to receive information, to channel, as you say, to read other people's genius and their ego. What do I mean by that? We're all equipped with genius, and genius means, like you were saying, Karen, you're a musician, and so you have a genius both as a painter and a musician, which is unimpaired by your ego. Your ego, our ego, wants to keep us safe, and refers to the past. It's always about referring to the past because out of fear that something might happen to us. So there's a good element to that. It's about keeping us alive, effectively. Yeah. And so what I do is I read the person in their genius and I read them in their ego, and I get information in both circumstances. And then I extract all that information and I paint the person in an image that they've chosen. And I add all of these quotes around them, and I add my own flavor to it as well. So again, the cheekiness comes through. I tend to ask them what their nickname was as a child, and it's what these do is they serve as a reminder for the person, the sitter, when they see them as a finished painting, of who they are in their genius. So that when they're in their shit, for want of a better word, they can refocus, because that's what it is. It's about recognizing that, as we talked about earlier, it's the pendulum of life.
Yeah.
We always end up in the shit, excuse the French, and it's about coming out of it when, refocusing when we're in it.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Yeah. It's interesting. It's that ego mind, our brain, or some say, you are not your mind. Your mind is not there for you, it's there for itself.
Mm.
It wants to protect, not you, but itself.
Mm.
And that brings us often into very awkward situations, because you make a choice that your ego told you to do, which ends up like, oh, shoot, that was the wrong direction. Whereas when you use your intuition and your gut feeling, so you listen to your feeling, you know it's right. You know it's right. Even if it's scary as hell, but it is right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I've been present to moments where I feel like, and it sounds so cheesy, but where I feel like magic is present, where I feel like the universe is helping me. I'm sure we've all had those moments.
Yeah.
And I believe those moments come in moments of intuition, because it's synchronicity, it's synergy, as we were saying earlier. Whereas when ego is at play, it's hard work, and it's all about pushing.
Yeah.
And I'm not implying that there isn't an element of hard work in life. I'm not suggesting that isn't the case. But I think that when we're using intuition, synchronicities happen that just can't be explained, and life becomes so much more enjoyable.
It is. I totally agree. And it's not always easy. I mean, sometimes you have your moments. But yeah, you're right. And it's power, not force. And it's, I think, our lesson in life to get there, to understand that, and to pop the bubble, and to really surrender. Because I listen to Abraham Hicks often. We did. And they said, get out of your way. You're always in your own way. Get out of your own way. That's popping the bubble. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's going back to what we were saying earlier, which ties in with what we're just saying now. In June, I went away. I went away to Kenya for a wedding, and I was sick before I went away. I had a chest infection, and I questioned whether it was wise for me to go or not. And egoically, I decided, no, I will go anyway. So I went, and I ended up, and actually on the Saturday before I left, I was struggling to sleep, and I thought, oh my God, imagine if I had pneumonia. I've never had pneumonia in my life. And on Tuesday, I went to the doctor, and in Nairobi, and the doctor said to me, "You've got pneumonia in both your lungs." And so I was sent to hospital, and I was like, "Shit!" Excuse my friend, I keep swearing, but I was like, I'm sitting in hospital, and I'm like, "Oh God!" So now I'm here in Kenya. I'm not going to enjoy my holiday, and I got worried. And then I was like, as soon as I surrendered to it and just said, okay, I'm sick. That's the what is sick. That's where I am. Then I was able to enjoy being in hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have preferred to have been out. But all of us, and I think that might help your audience just understand what surrendering means in my context.
Yeah, well, I have that too. And I understand that, because the surrendering is not like, okay, I surrender and then I'm in a snapshot, I'm healthy, but your brain starts to work with you. Whereas when you resist and resist and resist, and I don't want it, I don't want this, you get it, you get it, you get it, you get it. So that's always when I had this conversation with Karen. I said, I do things for social injustice, not everything is about that at all, but I have projects like Black Queer Role Models, survivors of domestic abuse, and we talked about the climate artists or climate activists that glued themselves to paintings, etc. And I said, yeah, you see a lot of people reacting, resisting, and I don't do that. I say, okay, let me paint trees or animals that are endangered in wildlife. And you can order that in a small piece with me for 97, and I return half of it to a foundation that for reforestation. That's the other way. Because when I start resisting and I'm angry, you get more and more and more. I don't believe in that way of resisting, of resistance, that way of activism. I don't believe in that. Because I think what you say, the universe is different. And I also dare to say that your fear of getting pneumonia created it, because fear really numbs down your whole immune system in one go. It's stress. 100%. That's stress. So 100%. Yeah. But you're 100%. Here, you got out. So yeah, it is important to know this. And I think, and we talked about it too, but art and artists are really good at that. And I think also necessary in the world to bring awareness, but also to bring happiness and joy, and to provoke, to tease, and to let people think.
Yeah.
So would you say that your art is geared towards social awareness of issues like climate change, for instance? Because I noticed a piece of that too.
I think there's definitely a social awareness side to it. I think, you know, I've often said that I see my life as an experiment in understanding myself, understanding Nicolas, and understanding humanity, understanding humans. And so, yeah, there's a social element to it. There's an element of helping people to recognize that they are powerful. Each and every single one of us is powerful. Yeah. And you know, what I like, there are layers in the paintings, and it's interesting when people have said to me in the past, you know, to speak about my paintings, I actually started writing the poetry because I didn't want to tell too much, because I believe there's value in discovery. I can tell you something and you might take it in and you might remember part of it. But if you discover it yourself, it has a whole different impact. And it's more likely to resonate in ways that I could never help you if I just told you.
Yes and no. I've seen the similar, and I can imagine that you can look at a work of art, and like on the other art fair, was before everyone was there, I was walking around and there was so much to see, and I absorb everything. I never take photos. Never. I absorb it myself. I want to see. People have to learn to see again without an iPhone or something. And there was one booth that was a serenity within all the people who had really put everything, every square centimeter of their booth full. And there was one painting, and it really stopped me. And it resonated, and I asked her. And then we had a match, like, yeah, you have the same ideas and the same things. And so, yes, explanation can help. Telling the story behind it. I hear that a lot. I want to know the story behind that portrait. As I ask you, can you tell me the story behind your art? Because it gives more insight in who you are as an artist.
Yeah.
And that is important. And then there is the other aspect that everyone comes with his own background, his own pain body and his own pleasure body, and experiences, and will interpret it a different way.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So, yeah, but climate change, I saw, was important for you too.
Yeah, climate change is in there. It's in a couple of the pieces, and in Immersibilis, actually, the piece with the duck in it, on the left-hand side, what you see is people. So it's an imaginary scene, as I said, with the duck, in the ocean, and you've got Greenland. I call it Greenland is the land on the left, and it's sponsored, and you see that it's sponsored by Uhu Glue, which is the super glue brand. Because what they've done is the inhabitants of Greenland, and I'm not saying it's a fictitious situation, they've recognized that with the ocean rising, that they can create vertical beaches. So they've stuck these towels, and they've stuck themselves to the cliffs, and they're still wishing for sunny days, even though the ocean is rising and they're now on a vertical beach. So it's like, it really shows how humanity, we're so creative, we're so ingenious, we can come up with solutions to everything, even when we're creating the very reality we don't want. We're coming up with solutions, so we're creating a vertical beach when we're actually dreaming of sunshine, which creates the very need for a vertical beach.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is interesting what you say, because that's a very left hemisphere action, thinking that you can cultivate everything. Whereas when you leave it, it takes its own natural way, and you get what you dreamed of. And that is the difference between the left and the right hemisphere. You and I are right hemisphere people. And all those who are very much that left hemisphere always gives an answer, whether it's right or not. So that's why you get these weird things. Like someone told me he saw a white bubble somewhere. He had to go do a gig somewhere in Scotland, and high up there was a bubble white, and in it were all kind of tropical plants. And you saw a Brazilian tree in Scotland in a bubble. I had like, excuse me, why not plant this tree in Brazil? It belongs there. And that is what you hear from Sir David Attenborough, the same. He shows that we don't need this artificial way of rebuilding nature. We need to let nature take its course and help rebuild nature at the place where it's needed.
100%.
Yeah. So great piece. I saw it. Is that the one with the blue and then the pink?
Yes, it's got blue and pink in it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And a yellow duck.
And the yellow duck. Yeah. Yeah. So do you, as specialist in marketing, because that's your background, have some tips for fellow artists who start their art entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I think I was reflecting on this, and I think the key is to be natural. There's the word authentic is overused. I'd say be natural.
Yeah.
And recognize that marketing is about creating a market for your work. And effectively, it's about creating a market that then you can sell to. And for me, selling is about listening.
Yeah.
And it's about understanding what people are looking for and connecting with them. And following up. And for me, it's also about standing out. It's, and recognizing that I always like to say, if everybody's swimming left, how can you swim right? Because that's the way that you really get standout. And it doesn't mean to say, I think it's important to be yourself. That's what I say, because it can be smelt. As soon as somebody recognizes that you're not being yourself, it shows up. And so that's what I would say. Connection is important as well. And so from a marketing perspective, I'd say, choose something that means something to you, and talk about it and spread it and paint it and create it and whatever it is. And sooner or later, you'll be recognized for that very thing. And there's your marketing. Yes, you can still do the social media, you can still do PR, you can still do all the traditional methods, but it will go so much further when it actually comes from your heart and it's something that you radiate.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for this really great chat.
Thank you, Karen. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Where can people find you? I will obviously put that in the show notes, but...
So my handle on Instagram is The Color of Splash. which is a name I came up with a good few years ago as a play on a splash of color. And my website is thecolorofsplash.com, and color is spelled the UK way, so COLOUR.
Anywhere else? Instagram, LinkedIn?
So on
Facebook?
LinkedIn, I'm Nicolas Ferguson, and same on Facebook as well.
Okay, I will put it
And
in
on
the
Instagram,
notes.
I'm the Color of Splash.
The Color of Splash on Instagram. Yeah. Yeah, I know that because I follow you. So, yeah, I will put that in the show notes. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
Take care.